Night blanketed the countryside with an ink-black hush, punctuated only by the rhythmic chirp of insects hidden among tall grasses. Flickering lanterns revealed a narrow footpath cut through banana groves and sugarcane fields. At the path's far end strode a lone figure draped in a long coat, wide-brimmed hat sagging in the damp heat. Few villagers would dare wander so late. Rumours claimed the most fearful things prowled after midnight. Yet the figure walked with measured purpose, guided by an unseen hand. Some said he was a bokor, a master of both the noble and sinister sides of voodoo. Others claimed he was more demon than man. But to anyone who caught a fleeting glimpse of his eyes beneath the brim of his hat, there was no disputing his power. He carried gourds strapped to his back, eerie things bearing painted Vevi patterns. These gourds whispered when the wind blew, as though spirits dwelled within. His name was Lamar, and he had spent years wandering from one Haitian village to another, ever since he first earned his reputation in the inland mountains. Word circulated that he possessed a rare facility for containing souls, those unquiet spirits unable to find rest. Through arcane rites learned from ancient scrolls and vanished mentors, Lamar had found a way to trap restless souls inside dried calabash husks. Some believed these souls included the spirits of criminals and the unshriven dead. Others claimed he captured even innocent ghosts, harnessing them for his own purposes. Lamar himself never offered any explanation, nor did he stay in one place long enough for anyone to challenge him. When the restless dead tormented farmland or town, however, people sought him out. He was, after all, the one who could subdue the intangible. He arrived in the small village of Les Ramon on a humid night, guided by the faint glow of a solitary flambeau near the entry. Les Ramon was nestled at the edge of a vast bay, where mangroves shouldered up against the waters like silent sentinels. By stale rumour, a malevolent spirit had been appearing at dusk, muttering unintelligible curses and knocking on doors when no one was around to answer. The presence sowed fear among the fishing families, who discovered footprints traced in salt up and down the docks, vanishing into the wide sea. Children refused to sleep, terrified they would wake to see a spirit leaning over their beds. Mothers offered up prayers at their humble altars, hoping to keep the apparition away. As Lamar passed the first row of driftwood hovels, a trembling father stepped outside and hailed him, timidly offering a tot of fermented cane juice for his exhaustion. "I've come to rid your village of the spirit," Lamar said quietly, accepting the drink but leaving it untouched. His words carried the weight of an oath, and he rested one hand on the largest calabash at his side, its surface etched with swirling patterns in red and black. The father bowed, relieved that help had arrived. However, the flicker of hope in the man's eyes faded when Lamar demanded payment. To quell the uneasy dead, the bokor's price was not gold alone. He demanded certain offerings for the ceremony: the unborn fruit of a cocoa tree, a black rooster with no blemishes, and a promise kept in blood. The father swallowed hard, uncertain whether they could procure all that was asked, but too desperate to refuse. At the local chapel, Lamar set out the conditions more plainly. The entire village had gathered at the building's threshold, the men standing shoulder to shoulder, the women peering anxiously from behind them. They had heard stories about the bokor, who gathered souls in gourds and carried them along the roads like a travelling menagerie of spirits. No one wanted to ask what happened to those souls once they were entrapped, but curiosity danced in every wary gaze. Lamar's expression was unchanging as he dropped a satchel of powders and herbs onto a wooden table that squeaked under the weight. "It is not enough to ask me to seal the spirit away." Lamar spoke slowly, in a voice that seemed simultaneously near and far. "Souls do not bend easily, especially those who cling to the mortal world. The consequences of my craft live on after the final word of the ceremony. Baron Samedi may come to claim his rightful due if a spirit is stolen from him. So, I ask again, are you sure you want this? Are you prepared for the dark vow you must make?" A hush fell over the crowd. Then the village elder, a meticulously stooped woman garbed in a patchwork dress, emerged with trembling steps. Her eyes burned with a weary mix of resolve and fear. She offered a respectful tilt of her chin. "We do not ask this lightly," she said, her creased voice echoing. "Our children can't sleep, and our fishermen refuse to set sail unless the sun stands high. We'll do whatever is needed, but please show us your mercy, bokor." Lamar nodded once, then explained that the dark vow required one volunteer to forfeit their place among the ancestors in the afterlife. The vow would tether that volunteer's future spirit to the captured ghost, sealing them both. The volunteer's soul would essentially stand guard like a warder, preventing the captured spirit from escaping the gourd. The crowd balked at the requirement, but still no one dared to question it. There was whispering, wringing of hands. Tension spread like an unseen storm. One figure edged forward. A chained-thin fisherman named Gesner. He lifted his chin and pronounced his willingness. His voice shook but held firm. Gesturing to his sickly mother and younger siblings, he locked eyes with Lamar. "I will do it. Protecting my family is worth any price," he said. A hush settled, broken only by the howl of wind rattling the chapel's shutters. That very night, they gathered behind the chapel, near an old almond tree that twisted its branches against the moonlit sky. Lamar set his gourds on the ground in a half-circle, each mouth sealed by a cork stopper carved with sigils. A worn mat of straw lay at the center, sprinkled with powders made from crushed bone and ground coffee beans. The air thickened with pungent incense. Gesner stood at the edge, trembling in the flickering lamplight, as Lamar chanted quietly to Papa Legba, petitioning for the crossroads to be open. One by one, the villagers recited sacred prayers to protect themselves from the darkness. The only man who did not pray was Lamar, as his role was not to supplicate, but to command. He intoned an invocation in an archaic dialect that seemed to reverberate against the mountains. The presence stirring among the fields responded. A sudden gust extinguished half the lanterns. Shrouded in near darkness, Lamar beckoned a handful of men to set the final offerings in place. The cocoa fruit, the black rooster tied at the feet, and a shallow bowl of salt water drawn from the bay. He dipped his fingers into the bowl and flicked droplets in every direction, chanting for the wandering spirit to appear and heed his call. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the almond tree and stirring the flames of the remaining lanterns into spasms. At first, there was only silence. Then an anguished moan drifted through the air. Though no shape was visible, the presence was nearly tangible. A sour smell faintly reminiscent of decaying seaweed rose from the ground, as though the spirit had carried ocean refuse on its ephemeral form. Women shrank back, and the men raised trembling hands to hold them in place. Lamar spread his arms, coiling the chant into a summoning. Then, gradually, the shape materialized. A hazy figure wreathed in brine-scented shadows, quivering with unrest. Gesmer's resolve faltered for a moment as the spirit's face half-formed in the smoky moonlight. It was an old man with sunken cheeks and hollow eyes. He bore a fisherman's net crumpled at his side and stared with a deep sense of anger. Who knew what had tied this lost soul to Les Rameaux? Perhaps it had drowned at sea or succumbed to a lonely vigil on some remote sandbank. Regardless of the root cause, it now chased away the living in a desperate plea for acknowledgement. Lamar's voice rose over the moaning wind. He spoke an incantation that pulled the spirit closer to the largest calabash. The swirling designs on the gourd glowed faintly, as if the lines were channels guiding spiritual power to its center. The old fisherman's ghost struggled against this invisible pull, drifting sideways, arms outstretched in a silent cry. Lamar scattered more powders, intensifying the gourd's magnetic hold. The spirit drew closer, so close that its wrinkled face seemed to press against the side of the calabash. Then, with a sudden whoosh, the ghost was sucked in, A high-pitched wail filled the night, followed by a jarring silence. Lamar sealed the gourd's neck with a cork stopper carved in the likeness of a skull. The captured spirit thrashed inside, shaking the gourd, but it could not escape. To complete the ceremony, Gesner had to make the dark vow. Lamar took the fisherman by the arm, pricked his fingertip with a small bone needle, and guided the blood into a thin line across the gourd's lid. Then Lamar pressed his own thumb to the red line, locking the vow with another incantation. Now part of Gesner's soul was bound to guard the spirit within the calabash, ensuring it remained contained. The black rooster flapped in panic nearby. Lamar, concluding the ceremony, made a swift cut across the bird's throat, letting the blood flow into a waiting bowl. It was a final offering to Baron Samedi, a sign that the rightful lord of the dead had not been wholly cheated by the bokor's actions. Relief spread through the village. Men exhaled loud sighs, women wept with relief, and the children, roused by curiosity, tiptoed to see the strange calabash, very much real and trembling in Lamar's hands, as though the spirit might crack the vessel at any moment. But for now, the old fisherman's ghost was subdued. Lamar accepted the villagers' payment in produce, livestock, and a handful of coin, but no one dared question how many other souls he carried in his sack of gourds. After a short rest, he prepared to leave, as was his custom. He never lingered to see the aftermath of his bargains, but Le Ramon was not quite done with him. Late the following afternoon, as Lamar prepared to depart along the forested road, a woman caught up to him. She let out a raspy cry for him to stop. It was Gesner's mother, short of breath, wearing misshapen shoes. She threw herself at Lamar's feet, tears streaking her face. Gesner, it seemed, had fallen gravely ill since the ceremony. He had collapsed at dawn, complaining of an unbearable cold in his soul, as if part of him was siphoned away. Shaken and desperate, the mother begged Lamar for a remedy. The man frowned. He had warned them of the cost and assured them no one parted with a fraction of their soul unscathed. Still, something about her frail pleas stirred a flicker of unease in him. He rarely cared for the aftermath of his dark trades, but the mother's sorrow echoed in his mind. Lamar returned to the chapel, where Gesner lay shivering on a straw cot. The air stank of sweat and worry, and the young fisherman's eyes darted beneath closed lids. Lamar examined him, placing a hand on the man's brow. Gesner mumbled about dark waters, about a net dragging him under. Realization dawned on Lamar. Part of Gesner's soul lay within that stormy sea of the captured spirit. If the village truly wanted him to recover, they needed to release Gesner from the vow, which meant letting the spirit go. Fear lanced his heart. If the spirit was freed, it would return to its vengeful wandering, more furious than before. He told the mother the truth, bracing for her reaction. "We'll not recover unless we sever the link, but that means the spirit escapes the gourd. It might haunt the village again." The mother's eyes flickered with turmoil. Her maternal instincts insisted she save her son at any cost, but she dreaded inflicting further harm on Le Ramon. Lamar offered no false comfort. In the hush that followed, Gesner's mother bent close to her child, stroking his hair, tears falling to the dirt floor. "Do it," she whispered. "Better we face that spirit again than lose my boy." She turned to the others, people who had gathered at the threshold, anxious for answers, and repeated her request. The villagers murmured among themselves. Some pounded their fists, outraged that they might face the ghost again, while others pitied her anguish. Ultimately, the father, who had once served Lamar cane juice, stepped forward. "Let the fish be weighed before it's caught. We can't condemn Gesner for protecting us. If the bokor can cure him, he must." A subdued agreement rippled through the crowd. Thus Lamar was forced to attempt a reversal of his magic. It was not something he did often, nor did he relish it. He had spent years perfecting incantations to trap restless souls, not free them without lethal consequence. Nonetheless, under the anxious watch of the villagers, he resolved to try. At dusk, they gathered by the same almond tree. Once again, torches ringed the clearing, and offerings were laid out. Sweetened coffee, a loaf of bread laced with herbs, and a single white candle for the kindness of Ezuli, the lover of love. Lamar opened the largest gourd, chanting carefully in reverse. The strange echo of his voice caused the candle flame to twist upward in a wavering silver glow. Slowly, a shimmering shape emerged from the gourd's mouth, a swirling face contorted with anger. Freed from its prison, the old fisherman's spirit roiled with fresh fury. It drifted upward, scarring the night air with an otherworldly shriek. The villagers shrank back, except for the mother, who refused to flee, clutching at hope that this release would heal her son. Lamar concentrated, his face tense. He continued reciting the reversal incantation, controlling the spirit's thrashing attempt to escape into the darkness. He needed to ensure that the bond tethering Gesna's soul fragment dissolved, returning it to the young man's mortal body. In the harsh glow of the torches, the spirit swiped at Lamar, who stumbled back, nearly losing the gourd. For a moment, the bokor gasped for breath. He felt a chilling brush against his chest, as if looking into a watery grave. He clasped the gourd firmly, chanting even more powerfully, calling upon Papa Legba to guide the lost part of Gesna's soul. The spirit's shape flickered, then twisted with a howl that curved through every ear like shattered glass. Slowly, the fragment of Gesna's essence tore away from the ghost, a teardrop of translucent light. It drifted like a star toward Lamar, who channeled it into a small clay vessel. Then, with a final chant, he directed it into the unconscious fisherman's body, which lay near the tree on a straw mat. Finally freed of the vow, Gesna gasped, eyes fluttering open. Relief washed over those gathered, but the spirit, no longer bound, howled with an unrestrained hatred. Ravenous for retribution, it lunged toward Gesna. In that instant, Lamar acted, brandishing a second gourd. With quick precision, he flung a handful of graveyard dust over the spirit, reciting a binding incantation that anchored the ghost. Another vortex-like pull materialized, and the spectre shrieked as it was drawn into the second calabash. Lamar jammed the stopper in place, sealing the spirit away. This time, no villager's soul was required to guard it, for Lamar had harnessed a different magic, weaving twin expansions of prayer to Baron Samedi and Marmon Brigitte, not to mention his personal reservoir of arcane knowledge. Sweat beaded heavily on Lamar's brow. The effort had drained him. Still, he managed to stand tall, collecting the second gourd, which now rattled with the captive spirit's fury. Even from inside, the muffled howls reverberated in the evening air. The villagers stared with tense gratitude, uncertain whether to rejoice or fear the bokor's power. Once more he had saved them, yet his methods left them uneasy. Never before had they witnessed the possession and expulsion of a soul fragment. Exhausted as he was, Lamar's sense of purpose returned swiftly. He had proven that he could bend spiritual forces to his will, but he had also glimpsed the profound heartbreak that accompanied his craft. The mother's tears, Gesna's collapse, these were unnatural consequences. In binding the dead, he entangled the living. Lamar exhaled a weighty breath. Part of him yearned to leave the spirit behind, fling the cursed gourd into the sea. But that was not how his tradition worked. He left Les Rameaux that night, after ensuring Gesna rested in stable health. The mother thanked him profusely, too weary to speak more than a few words. Silent villagers parted to let him pass, their expressions torn between relief and faint dread. Wordlessly, Les Mains set off along the moonlit road, a staff in one hand, his shoulders weighed down by the brimming gourd strapped to his back. He journeyed inland, where the terrain rose toward lush green hills. Days passed in half-remembered stops at crossroads and hidden hamlets. Often he felt the gourds quake on his back, as if the captured ghosts stirred in uneasy slumber. During these travels, memory gnawed at him. The mother's anguish, Gesna's near sacrifice, and the hostility of the old fisherman's spirit. For years, Lamar had told himself that capturing restless souls served a greater, necessary purpose. freeing villagers from vengeful hauntings or curbing malicious apparitions that might corrupt the living. He had rarely considered how the living ones suffered, forced to make dark vows. A faint sense of shame crept in, though he tried to quell it. He recalled his apprenticeship under the old member who had taught him the rudiments of Vodou. Respect the loi, honor the ancestors, never enslave a spirit. Yet another teacher, cunning and bitter, had introduced him to the path of bokor magic. Command first, show respect second. It was a contradictory creed, forging him into a wanderer who parleyed with death whenever it suited. But now he realized he might have strayed too far from the traditions that valued balance. Perhaps, in his zeal to dominate these lost souls, he had overlooked the suffering left in his wake. He arrived at a bustling crossroad market near the base of a mountain. Vendors sold fried plantains, salted fish, and fragrant tonics. Their laughter and chatter mingled with the clinking of glass bottles. Lamar kept to the fringes, reluctant to startle anyone with his rattling gourds. Still, he could not escape notice for long. A travelling priest pointed at the calabashes and asked if Lamar was the rumoured soul collector. Lamar nodded curtly, hoping to avoid further conversation. But a small crowd started to gather, curious about the hush that fell around him. One woman, tall and imposing, stepped forward. She claimed to be a mumbo from a family line known for summoning blessings of Urzuli. She regarded Lamar with narrowed eyes. "It is said your work defies the natural order," she stated. "I have heard how you bind spirits and carry them in these hollow gourds. Why do you do it?" Lamar paused. For the first time in a long while, he realized he had no easy answer. Before, he would have offered practicalities. Your homes are safe, your lives secure. But after Les Rameau, he found himself questioning the morality of forcing souls into captivity. At last he answered with reserved honesty, "Because if I do not, the angry dead might wreak their vengeance upon the living." The Mambo studied him for a moment. Then, with a softer voice, she said, "Some spirits can be guided to peace without enslavement. It is a heavier burden than you might think, carrying all that anger inside your gourds." She gestured at the row of containers strapped to his back. "Perhaps you should consider helping them pass on." He clenched his jaw, feeling frustration wrestle with a flicker of guilt. "Is it so simple?" he asked. "If it were, they would not be restless in the first place." She offered a tired smile. "Simple, no, but possible. There are rites ones known to priests, mambos, and even bokors of a gentler persuasion that gently cleanse a spirit of rage and guide it forward." She leaned in, lowering her voice. "You look haunted by regret. Carrying ghosts might give you power, but it also condemns you to remain tethered to the gloom between worlds." Lamar's gaze grazed the ground. Somewhere inside, he recognized the truth in her words, and yet he felt uneasy about unraveling the method he had lived by for so long. Though he had never intended to be a monster, he knew that many saw him as one. Still, a tiny spark of resolution took hold in his heart. Perhaps he could learn those rites, at least for the sake of the agonized spirits. He didn't yet know if he could bring himself to release them all. Indeed, some might be too dangerous to unleash, but at the very least, he might find a balance, guiding some wayward souls to the deep peace beyond suffering. With a respectful bow, he thanked the mumble for her wisdom. She pressed a small article into his hand, a smooth stone etched with a delicate vevev. "Seek me out, if you're ready," she said. Then she turned and vanished into the bustling market crowd. Lamar was left holding the occult token. He glanced between it and his gourds, feeling the weight of the restless spirits therein. For once, he wondered if they felt hope for release. By the time evening settled, Lamar had relocated to a quiet grove just beyond the crowded market. He wiped sweat from his brow. The second gourd, the one holding that old fisherman's spirit, rattled feebly. A memory of the mother's tears stabbed at him. Perhaps he owed a measure of redemption to those he had imprisoned. Setting the gourd down on a rock, He lit a small candle and whispered a half-formed prayer to Papa Legba, asking for guidance at the doorway between worlds. The wind stirred the flame, but it remained lit. He rested a hand against the gourd's rough surface. Inside, the spirit's presence pulsed like a distant heartbeat, still bitter, still trapped. Pulling the stone token from his pocket, Lamar reflected on the crossroads that now stretched before him. One road led back to the cycle of entrapment and wandering. The other opened to uncertain transformation, perhaps forging a new path where he traded the power of forced servitude for the gratitude of souls set free. Whether he would be accepted by the living if he changed his ways did not concern him as much as whether he could face himself each night. For now, the future remained as cloudy as the Haitian twilight, but a faint glimmer of possibility had pierced the shadows. Rising from his seat, Lamar slipped the token back into his pocket. He gathered his gourds, feeling their tremors ripple up his spine. As the candle sputtered low, he dipped his head and made a solemn promise. Tomorrow, or perhaps the day after, he would seek out the Mumbo's guidance, learn those rites, and open a new chapter in his life. For all the dark vows he had witnessed, for all the intangible spells he had cast, maybe he could discover a sliver of grace that would mend the tears between the living and the lost. He resumed his journey under the starlit sky, the murmur of spirits accompanying his footsteps, but this time their whispers no longer felt like mere trophies of his prowess. They were appeals, moans of longing for the final rest they had been denied. Lamar moved forward, listening a little more carefully than before, letting the distant hum fill him with a mingled sense of sorrow and resolve. A gentle breeze teased the tall grasses, and for a moment one might have imagined that in the hush of moonlight, the bokor was not just a captor of souls, but a guide, walking toward an uncharted redemption to learn new magic that might one day set those voices free. And somewhere beneath that soft Haitian night, the spirits lifted their lament, carried along behind him, waiting for the dawn.